Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan's army says the Indian leadership's irresponsible statements pose a serious threat to regional peace. Speaking in Rawalpindi, the military spokesperson said the army is ready to give a befitting response if India imposes a war on Pakistan. He said the international community must take notice of Indian actions in occupied Kashmir, which could lead to destabilization in the region. He said Pakistan's civilian and military leadership want peace in the region. He said Kashmir has been occupied by Indian forces for 71 years, but New Delhi still couldn't overcome the Kashmiri people's desire for freedom. Pakistan's army has killed 5 terrorists in an operation in North Waziristan's Dattakhel town. The army's media wing says 2 army soldiers, Mohammad Shamim and Asad Khan, were martyred during the operation. Inter-Services Public Relations said the operation was conducted on intelligence information. In India, massive protests have broken out in New Delhi after a boy opened fire at a rally against the Citizenship Act, leaving a student injured. The incident happened after radical outfit Hindu Sena threatened to remove anti-Citizenship Act protesters in New Delhi by force. Angry protesters clashed with police outside the Jamia Millia Islamia University and broke down barricades. Police used water cannons to disperse them. Since December, over 25 people have been killed during protests against the law, which is being seen as anti-Muslim. A New York-based committee to protect journalists has denounced India's claim of restoring internet in occupied Kashmir. Last week, New Delhi restored 2G internet in the valley after 6 months with access to only 300 whitelist websites. In a statement, the committee said New Delhi's claim is a complete farce. It said all news websites are still blocked and internet speeds are too slow for the journalists to be able to work. It said India's curbs on internet services completely disregard the right to freedom of speech. The committee demanded the complete and immediate restoration of internet. In Syria, 10 people have been killed, including 5 women, after airstrikes by Russia reportedly hit civilian targets in opposition-held Idlib. A war monitor said the strikes hit an area near a medical clinic in the town of Ariha in Idlib province. It said 3 entire buildings had collapsed nearby. The latest deaths bring the total number of civilians killed by Russian airstrikes in Idlib over the past 24 hours to 21. However, the Russian Foreign Ministry has denied bombing these locations. Elsewhere, 2 civilians were killed and 4 others injured in a bomb attack in northern Syria's Tal Abyad district. Meanwhile, the U.S. Special Envoy for Syria, James Jeffrey, said 200 airstrikes have hit the region in the last 3 days. Jeffrey said the violence has displaced some 700,000 people in northwest Syria. Iraq's military has said it is resuming operations with the US-led coalition against ISIS. The operations were halted following the killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani and Iranian attacks on the bases hosting US forces. In a statement, the military said it decided to carry out joint actions to fight ISIS. It said this was done in order to exploit the international coalition's remaining time before a new relationship is set up. Earlier, the UN said ISIS has begun reasserting itself in the Middle East and continues to seek opportunities to strike the West. The UN report portrays an organization that has suffered setbacks but still poses a local and international threat. Turkey says France is responsible for Libya's instability, accusing Paris of wanting to control Tripoli's natural resources. Turkey's foreign ministry spokesman Hami Aksoy said Paris has been supporting Libyan strongman Khalifa Haftar since 2011. Aksoy said France should stop backing Haftar if it wants the implementation of the decisions taken at this month's Berlin conference. He said Haftar's attack on the legitimate government is a threat to the country's territorial integrity and sovereignty. The remarks came after French President Emmanuel Macron accused Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan of ramping up interference in Libya. Macron claimed Turkish ships carrying Syrian mercenaries have been seen arriving on Libyan soil. Moving on to China, where the death toll from the new coronavirus sweeping China has risen to 170. With a confirmed case in Tibet, the virus has now spread to every region in mainland China and at least 20 other countries. More in this report.
As China wrestles with the coronavirus, over 1,000 new cases of the disease have emerged in the past 24 hours, making a total number of 7,700. The World Health Organization meets today to decide if the disease is serious enough to warrant a global health emergency. The international health body says despite a small number of cases outside China, the virus has the potential for a far larger outbreak.
But the whole world needs to be on alert now. The whole world needs to take action and be ready for any cases that come, either from the original epicenter or from other epicenters that become established.
The EU says nearly 600 European citizens in China want to be repatriated. It said all member states want to bring their citizens home. The bloc says they can't put hundreds of people on one plane without screening them first.
What is specific about this virus is that these are complex operations. You don't now send a plane to Wuhan, you load up the people and you go back home. You have to screen the people. You don't want a plane with 200 people and one of them is infected and infects everybody else on the flight back. When they come back, you have to have quarantine facilities.
Starbucks and Tesla have closed their outlets and offices in the country. They are joined by Google, which has shut its offices because of the outbreak.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has set up an emergency center at the Ministry of Health to prevent the coronavirus from entering and spreading in the country. In a press briefing, Foreign Office spokesperson Aisha Farooqi said a high-powered committee is considering steps to protect the citizens. She said Pakistan is in touch with China to ensure the safety of its nationals. Farooqi said the opening of the Khunjra border with China has also been rescheduled to April from February. In China, Beijing's streets and shopping malls are empty as the coronavirus outbreak overshadows Chinese New Year celebrations. Over 2,000 stores in the country have already been closed because of the epidemic. More in this report.
The week-long Lunar New Year holiday usually sees audiences flooding into cinemas and people with their families crowding into tourist sites. This year is different. Public areas, including every tourist trap, have been closed by fears of the infectious coronavirus. Starbucks now has signs asking customers to wear a mask before entering the cafe.
And now I have to go back early to my home. And I couldn't even see the places that I wanted. Like I really wanted to see the Great Wall and I won't be able to see it. And it's my first time here in Asia. And I feel very unlucky.
Another worry is the economy, with residents and investors alike concerned by the economic hit the disease will cause. It's believed output could be reduced and businesses at every level undermined by travel restrictions introduced by the government to slow the spread of the virus.
I am sure it will affect the national economy. It's during the Spring Festival and it's in the holiday season. However, you see, there are not many people on the streets in Beijing. I feel the impact will be extremely big. Therefore, I hope people in Hubei will stop eating wild animals and food without inspection. I think it's a disaster.
170 people have lost their lives so far as the virus spreads its reach across China and into at least 16 other countries.
Welcome back. Israeli forces have wounded 41 Palestinians protesting against U.S. President Donald Trump's Middle East peace plan across the West Bank. The Palestine Red Crescent Society said Israeli forces fired tear gas and rubber bullets. It said demonstrators were wounded in the towns of Tul Karam and Al Bira, as well as the Arub refugee camp and the villages north of the Jordan Valley. The protesters chanted slogans against the plan, saying Palestine is not for sale. Hundreds of Palestinian refugees took to the streets of Beirut in Lebanon to protest against Trump's deal. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas will visit the UN within 2 weeks to address the Security Council on his rejection of the new plan. Meanwhile, Israeli warplanes have bombed multiple locations in the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Defense Ministry says its jets struck Hamas posts in the southern city of Khan Yunis and the central city of Deir al-Balah. Security officials said 2 successive airstrikes were carried out in retaliation for rocket launches from within the Strip. They said a rocket was fired from Gaza into Israel. No casualties have been reported so far. The attack came shortly after Israel announced it would step up its military presence in the West Bank and near Gaza. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has sought to diffuse tensions over Britain's decision to allow Huawei a role in its communication network, but he described the Chinese Communist Party as the biggest threat to the current era. Pompeo is on a 2-day official visit to the UK, speaking alongside British Foreign Minister Dominic Raab. Pompeo said the 2 nations will work together to resolve their differences. On Tuesday, the UK defied the US by granting Huawei a limited role in its 5G network. Washington has been lobbying London to exclude the firm on security grounds. Britain's Huawei decision came at a critical juncture as the country prepares to negotiate a trade deal with the US after Brexit. Britain is preparing to leave the EU, while the bloc's Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, warned this week of the fresh risk of a cliff edge at the end of 2020. In the meantime, Northern Ireland violin maker Martin McLean is aware of the uncertainty that overshadows the province's trading status. The Council of Europe's Parliamentary Assembly has voted to fully restore the rights of the Russian delegation. Officials say 96 lawmakers voted in favor, while 44 were against the move and 7 abstained from voting. The draft resolution says the Assembly wants to assess the progress made until PACE co-rapporteurs visit Russia. The PACE noted Russia has fulfilled some recommendations included in the resolution for its return to the body. The measures included Moscow's participation in prisoner swaps with Ukraine and progress towards the Minsk agreements. Members of the PACE drafted the resolution in June last year. The US has issued fresh sanctions on Russia over its annexation of Crimea. The US Treasury Department has blacklisted 8 individuals and a Moscow-based railway company. In a statement, the department said it blacklisted Crimea's pro-Russian Prime Minister Yuri Gotsenyuk. It said the Grand Service Express that operates in Crimea has also been sanctioned. The Treasury Department said the individuals were being sanctioned by both Canada and the EU. The Russian embassy in Washington says the sanctions will not make Moscow change its policies. It said the curbs will only erode the basis for bilateral cooperation. In Pakistan, 11 people have died and 6 others were injured when a passenger van crashed and caught fire near the eastern province of Punjab. Officials say the speeding van lost control after one of its tires burst. Rescue officials said 6 wounded have been shifted to a hospital in Lahore. They said there are 3 women among the deceased. Officials said only 3 bodies have been identified. The van, carrying 18 passengers, was traveling from Lahore to Islamabad. The death toll from floods in southeast Brazil's Minas Gerais state has risen to 54. Officials say the region recorded its heaviest rain in 110 years. Disaster officials say 45 people died in Minas Gerais, while 9 others were killed in neighboring Espírito Santo. Officials say other states in the region have also suffered deaths and severe damage, with 19 people still missing. Nearly 28,000 people have been evacuated, while 101 towns declared a state of emergency. Belo Horizonte recorded 180 millimeters of rain in 3 hours, causing damage to dozens of neighborhoods. Japanese authorities have obtained a fresh arrest warrant for former Nissan chairman Carlos Ghosn. Warrants were issued on suspicion of violations of the immigration control law. Ghosn fled to Lebanon last year as he was awaiting trial on charges of underreporting earnings and embezzlement. The authorities have also issued arrest warrants for a former US Special Forces soldier and 2 others for helping him flee. The arrest warrants come days after prosecutors searched the office of Gon's former lawyer in Tokyo. Lebanon and Japan have 40 days to decide whether Gon will be extradited to Japan or stand trial in Lebanon. Nobel Peace Laureate Malala Yousafzai has joined over 2,000 activists to declare a state of emergency for people and the planet. The declaration is part of an open letter addressed to the world leaders who signed up the UN's program to tackle poverty, inequality and climate change by 2030. The advocates are demanding urgent action to deal with global-scale problems and conditions they say are only getting worse. Along with Yousafzai, environmentalist Jane Goodall and screenwriter Richard Curtis are among the signatories. The letter was coordinated by Project Everyone, co-founded by Curtis to raise awareness of the Global Development Goals. Welcome back. The American aerospace company SpaceX has launched its 4th batch of 60 Starlink satellites. This is the second part of the 2020 push to put 1,500 satellites into orbit by the end of the year.
3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff.
A sooty Falcon 9 rocket roared to life, lifting off from Space Launch Complex at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida. The rocket carried 60 more Starlink satellites for SpaceX's growing constellation. The satellites all successfully deployed to low Earth orbit about an hour after liftoff. Last May, SpaceX launched the first batch of operational satellites. There are now 240 circling the Earth. SpaceX eventually wants to fly humans to the International Space Station.
Right, and yes.
US social media giant Facebook has settled a long-running legal dispute for scanning and tagging people's photos. The social media company has agreed to pay $550 million over a privacy lawsuit. The company's shares have also dropped despite the company's reported stronger than forecast earnings. The case has been ongoing since 2015 and the settlement was announced in its quarterly earnings. Facebook began using facial recognition in the US in 2010 when it automatically tagged people in photos using its tag suggestions tool. In Singapore, dozens of firms are racing to launch their lab-grown meat alternatives in the market. One of these companies specializes in synthetic shrimp. More in this report.
As consumer concerns about the environment and animal welfare grows, more and more people want to go vegetarian, but aren't ready to say goodbye to the taste of meat. Singaporean company Sheikh Meats aims to introduce lab-grown shrimps in the market for the first time in the world. To grow the meat in laboratory, the company extracts a sample of original cells from shrimp. The cells are then put in a special solution to multiply.
And you can see that it's slightly turbid or murky because there are cells growing inside of it. It's not like super clear. That means that you have cells growing inside of this. And once we let this go on for a couple of weeks, the next step is to convert the stem cells into muscle fibers, which is your meat. And that also happens within the same vessel.
Writer journalist Travis Stewart reveals how it tastes like.
It just tastes like a regular dumpling. In terms of the texture, it's minced meat.
But many consumers have different opinions about the new meat.
I am willing to try. I may not eat it frequently, but I don't mind buying it because the animals in the oceans are declining.
In the future, younger people might be able to accept it, but my generation probably won't accept synthetic meat.
This so-called clean meat is still at a nascent stage. Sheikh Meats says it will be available in the marketplace for $50 per kg by the end of this year.
Pakistani government is holding a two-day conference in Kenya in a major trade outreach to Africa. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi is participating in the first ever Pakistan-Africa Trade Development Conference in Nairobi. The foreign minister said economic stability was a precondition for an independent foreign policy. Addressing the conference in Nairobi, he said Pakistan has introduced a new on-arrival visa policy. He added that tourism is now a strategic priority. The minister said Gawada is to Asia what Mombasa is to Africa. Pakistan and Kenya also signed a memorandum of understanding on the training of diplomats between the foreign ministries. In Iran, demonstrators regularly burn US, Israeli and British flags during rallies and protests. As tensions between Tehran and Washington have grown, so has business at Iran's largest flag factory. More about the unique company in this report.
At this factory in the town of Khomein, southwest of the capital of Tehran, young men and women print flags by hand and hang them to dry. At its busiest, the facility produces 2,000 US and Israeli flags a month. It makes over 1.5 million square feet of flags each year.
We have no problem with the American and British people. We have a problem with our governors. We have a problem with their presidents, with the wrong policy that they have.
The assassination of Iran's leading military commander, Qasem Soleimani, has once again brought out anti-American sentiments.
Compared to the cowardly actions of the United States, such as General Qasem Soleimani's assassination, this burning an American flag is a minimal thing against them. This is the least that can be done.
This is not always the case. At protests, when Tehran confessed to shooting down a Ukraine passenger plane, young demonstrators refused to run over the American flag painted on the street in Tehran.
Apple and its component supplier Broadcom have just been fined $1.1 billion for copyright infringement. A Los Angeles court has ordered them to pay the California Institute of Technology for breaking university patents. The Tech Research University alleged that Broadcom Wi-Fi chips in Apple iPhones violate patents on data transmission technology. Apple said it will appeal the verdict. In its court of findings, the tech giant argued it used off-the-shelf Broadcom chips but not the disputed component. International organization Oxfam has accused the EU of using aid money for Africa as a policy tool to curb migration to Europe. In its report, Oxfam said between 2015 to 2019, nearly $4.5 billion was spent largely without public oversight. The report says some of the largest recipients of EU funds were countries with known patterns of abusive behavior towards migrants, such as Libya. Oxfam said the allocation of funds was often based on political considerations rather than effectiveness and need. Wall Street stocks have fallen as the coronavirus death toll continues to rise in China. Facebook says it's also witnessing slow growth in revenue. All three major U.S. indices open lower as fears rise over the coronavirus impact on global economic growth. The Dow Jones Industrial Average and S&P 500 are trading lower by 0.25%, but the Nasdaq Composite Index is trading marginally lower. European markets also tumbled on Thursday, reacting to the U.S. Federal Reserve's decision to keep interest rates on hold. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. With the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus Special.